Hi guys, I'm Sid, and today I'm with Cam Dawson. Cam is the UK brand ambassador for Jack Daniels, a brand that he's been associated with for the last 4 odd years. And before that, he was tending bar. And Cam, you were born and raised in Scotland, right?
Indeed.
So how did you end up working so closely with an American whiskey brand? What happened? How did that all come about?
Well, yeah, it's always been a slightly controversial topic, especially in my household. I have a very Scottish whiskey-loving father,
Right.
And for his son to turn his back on Scotland was part of the reason I'm not allowed back into Scotland today. Is that was a joke.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when I was a cocktail bartender, I always used to try and go that extra mile for my guests.
Mm-hmm.
If a customer wanted to know something specific about any of my ingredients that were on the back bar, whether it be a liqueur or an American whiskey or a Tennessee whiskey like Jack Daniels, you always try and tell them something slightly different, and really go into as much detail as they want. So it was me being geeky about whiskey. So Jack Daniels in particular, we've got 151 years of stories. So getting them there and finding all these little lovely stories about where the whiskey comes from, the man himself that made it. You know, it always goes well when you're chatting about it behind the bar.
So you're one of those guys. If I would have come to you at your bar and said, Cam, why are we using Jack Daniels in this cocktail and why not any other? You'd be able to tell me why.
Absolutely.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
Lovely.
So I actually got into known within the company. I actually entered the Jack Daniels birthday cocktail competition in the UK,
and that's how they got.
That's how we got to know each other,
Right.
And then our working partnership blossomed from there. So I used to use Jack Daniels in a lot of cocktails. It's a brilliantly versatile whiskey. So.
So you are the UK ambassador for Jack Daniels, but you're in India. So so that means you obviously have a lot of work which extends beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. So what is it about your work that helped propagate the brand, and what do you do worldwide for Jack Daniels?
Worldwide for Jack Daniels, I'm very lucky that I get to go on a little bit of a travelling sprees every now and again. So I've worked in Norway, I've worked in India, I was in South Africa at the start of the year, and it's just helping the other markets, come and be a presenter for maybe American whiskey weeks, cocktail weeks, things like that, where if I can offer a masterclass delving into the history and the production process of Jack Daniels, I'm more than happy to help any other department, any other market.
Lovely. So tell me, as you would know, we are a massively enthusiastic whiskey drinking nation, and so what about Jack Daniels is it that we should know? What are its unique points? What is it that differentiates itself from others in the same, not in the same segment, but let's say as a whiskey, what differentiates it?
Well, I think American whiskey is starting to is definitely growing worldwide. People are realizing the amount of craft, the amount of passion that goes into every single bottle of Jack Daniels. And it's not just Scotland that makes great whiskey, it's the Americans too. It was made by a real guy 151 years ago.
When you say real guy?
A real guy, Jasper Newton Daniel, or Jack Daniels. Yeah, he was a real man. And he registered his distillery back in 1866. That actually makes this the oldest registered distillery in the United States.
Well, that's interesting.
Do you know that's 1 year older than Canada as well? I found this out recently.
And that's so interesting.
We're older than a whole country. Our closest neighbours, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. That's so interesting. So what is it about the whiskey? I mean, so for example, if you were to take me, I'm an amateur, and I have 2 whiskeys in front of me. So what do you think I will expect to find in my let's say second sip of Jack Daniels? Let's say the first is.
Yeah, well, I often say that if you're new to whiskey as a category, you should always start with an American whiskey.
Really?
Not to say anything bad about Scottish whiskey, but they focus a lot more on the stills and then the grain. We're getting a lot of natural sweetness coming from the wooden barrel. We can only use a wooden barrel once, and with that we're going to get an awful lot of natural vanillins, caramel tones, and it's all 100% natural. This is perfect if you're new to whiskey, you're new to the category. You want to develop your palate and not give it too much of a shock. So I always start off with American whiskey, and that's pretty much how I got into it as well. Jack Daniels was the first whiskey that I ever tried.
Really?
It wasn't a single malt from the far reaches of Scotland.
Oh, it was a single malt. I mean, being a Scot.
It was old number 7.
Oh, interesting.
Without a doubt.
Now, talking about casks and all of that, Jack Daniels is produced only in Lynchburg, right?
Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Lynchburg,
Every
Tennessee.
single drop. Of
Why?
Jack Daniels.
Why only in Lynchburg? Why haven't you gone somewhere else or expanded and all of that?
Because that's the way that it's done. If you call yourself a Tennessee whiskey, by law, you
Right.
have to make it within the borders of Tennessee.
Right.
Our water source is there. This is where Jack set up his distillery in 1866. That's where it's always been. And that's where it always will be. Looking at other categories of spirit, in today's modern distilling techniques, you can pretty much ensure that you can make certain spirits anywhere in the world, and you can make an identical spirit. But there's a lot of laws governing the protection of American whiskey.
Right.
Tennessee whiskey in particular is one of the most governed spirits in the world,
Right.
protecting it.
But now that you're you just mentioned that you're older than Canada. So during all that time, I'm sure there must have been stories and interesting things to talk about. I mean, seriously, do you have any stories you'd like to share?
Absolutely, we have survived two world wars. I think a couple of depressions.
Could you hold on one moment, please? I'd like you to get that in for a moment. This is a brand that's older than an entire country, and not a new country. I've found it's older than one of a fairly old country. So can you imagine how the legacy associated with that brand, the number of incidents that happened, the number of stories the brand practitioners and the brand ambassadors would have with them? So which is why I'm asking this, because I'm sure he has some interesting things to say.
No, not at all.
Oh.
So one that I often like talking about is one of my favorite ways to drink Jack Daniels. Is we'll probably talk about serves a little bit later, but it's called a Tennessee Mule. So it's a twist on a Moscow Mule, which you've probably heard of.
Yes.
It's usually made with vodka,
Yes.
ginger beer, a little bit squeeze of lime. Now, a Tennessee Mule is Jack Daniels, a big double measure there, topped up with ginger beer, with a little bit of Angostura bitters in there, just to give it a little edge of complexity, and then a wedge of orange instead of lime. It's really refreshing, it's spicy, it's a long drink, so it's good in the summer months. I love the story, the connection with it though. So that little tenuous link of being called a mule. During the 13 years of national prohibition in America, we couldn't distill alcohol. We couldn't make alcohol anymore, any of our whiskey. So the name was survived by Jack's nephew, Lem. He started the Jack Daniels Mule Trading Company. That's when, if you had a farm and you had a couple of working mules there, I would take your mules off you, I would break them in, or I would train them, and then I would sell them back to you. But this was the Jack Daniels Mule Trading Company. I love this little connection. When I'm thinking of cocktails, when I'm creating little twists and things, I always look for a story, something interesting that I can connect it to. So although the cocktail only came about in the 1940s, and I've twisted it in recent years to be made with Tennessee whiskey, there is a good little story, a good connection there.
But talking about Angostura bitters, and you've tended bars, so you'd be the right person to answer me this. So if I've noticed some people adding bitters directly to a drink. And I noticed some other people adding it to an empty glass and twirling it around the sides until the bitters dries on the sides, and then pouring the drink into that.
Do you know this is something that I haven't seen in a few years, but when I used to live in Scotland, quite a popular drink that was made there was done this way. So ice in the glass, bitters, throw it out, and then make the drink in there.
Right.
And it's
so
only
just the
since
aroma
my first visit to India that I realised that there are other markets that do this as well. Bitters was originally made as a medicinal elixir almost. It was there to cure the ails and other things. It was healthy to drink it. And the original definition of a cocktail was in 1806, and that was an invigorating spirit with water, sugar, and bitters. So
water, sugar, and bitters.
Yeah. So if you imagine an old-fashioned, which is called an oldfashioned because it follows the original definition, the old-fashioned way. You take this spirit. So you'll take, let's say, Tennessee whiskey, for argument's sake. You'll add bitters, you add a little bit of sugar, and then the water is coming in the form of the ice and the dilution.
You know, that's very interesting. You said old-fashioned because a few months ago, for the first time, I tasted an old-fashioned, which is interesting. I've always been a straight-up kind of person, and I tried an old-fashioned, and I simply loved it.
Absolutely.
And then when I started looking around, I found there's lots of other people who love whiskey-based cocktails as well, and there's a trend, in fact, almost global in nature, where the older cocktails which we've all kind of grown up with are being somewhat superseded with whiskey-based cocktails, and people are loving it. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think globally whiskey is growing. People are trying to find new and creative ways of drinking it. Speaking about the old fashioned, I've noticed that in quite a few Hollywood films, in TV shows, sitcoms, dramas, things like that, people are drinking old fashioned things like Mad Men. Crazy Stupid Love, the movie. They were drinking old fashions.
I remember seeing old fashioned in Mad Men. Yes.
Yeah. So people want to drink what they see these celebrities drinking in the movies and the TV shows and things like that.
So you think it's a media-led thing?
And I think bartenders have a huge part to play in this as well. With a bartender. When I was a bartender, I always used to try and get my guests onto my way of thinking. I wanted them to enjoy a cocktail that I enjoyed myself, so I could share that connection with them. And I think with bartenders, their taste, their flavor profile, their palates are developing. They're going to stronger cocktails like the old-fashioned. It's complementing the base spirit, the whiskey. And I think bartenders have a huge part to play in that. I think the old-fashioned is the world's most popular cocktail and some of the 50 best bars in the world.
That's another thing I didn't know. But seriously, have you tried any cocktails? Do you like cocktails? You really have to try the old-fashioned if you haven't tried it. Seriously, I mean, we've all grown up with those with cocktails largely made out of clear spirits, and what I found a world of difference with the old-fashioned. In fact, I discovered it at 2 p.m. when I proceeded to have I think 4 of them after that. It was delicious, I'm telling you that.
As long as it wasn't 2 a.m.
It was 2 p.m. In the afternoon, 4 cocktails in the afternoon. Seriously, man. Okay, Cam, there are so many whiskies out there. And Jack Daniels might be something which is new to our palate. So which one of the Jack Daniel expressions would you suggest that someone start with? Which is the first one they should taste?
I would say go for something a little bit more refined, like the Gentleman Jack. That's actually been through the Lincoln County process, or the charcoal mellowing twice.
Right.
So it gets mellowed through charcoal before it gets put into the barrel. It'll be in the barrel for X amount of years. It'll be picking up 60 to 70% of that whiskey's flavour. And when it comes out, Gentleman Jack goes through a further 3 foot of sugar maple charcoal. This is just going to soften the edges of the whiskey. Any tannin that the whiskey picks up from aging in this natural product are just going to be softened down. So when it's not all those woody, oaky notes in there, I think it's a little bit more refined. In the UK, I usually describe this during my seminars as a laid-back and mellow whiskey. And that does it. I think that sums it up perfectly. It's laid back and mellow. It's going to treat you right. Treat you like a gentleman. Yeah.
So laid back and mellow. What would you like to eat with that?
Now, with American whiskey, this is something that I do in the UK. I sometimes host meat and whiskey master classes. Now, if I pair it with a cocktail or I drink it straight, it really did.
Let's talk about both. Let's talk about an old-fashioned and Gentleman Jack.
Okay. Well, for an old-fashioned, I'd probably want something more like a single barrel, something with a bit more big and bold, really that can be a little bit of bitters, isn't going to hide too much of the whiskey. But let's say I would probably mix a Tennessee Mule into with Gentleman Jack. With that, something, let's say Americana vibe, chicken wings, definitely some.
I mean, with glaze, without the glaze. We're going to be talking sweet, right?
Well, you've got a lot of spice in a Tennessee Mule coming from the ginger beer, so that'll work. That'll cut through some heavy spice on a chicken wing. I'd probably go for a white meat there, just so it's not going to overpower anything. Yeah, I think that'd go well. Either that or try another cocktail, something like a number 7 sour. You can do a little bit of Tennessee whiskey in the form of Jack Daniel's Old Number 7, a little bit of lemon juice, sugar, maybe an egg white in there, and that'll cut through any fat content that is in, let's say, a steak or a burger or some pulled pork.
Let me just read the mind of just about every whiskey drinker who's watching this video and ask you this one question. Will Jack Daniels go with tandoori chicken?
I can safely say
every whiskey drinker in this country who's a non-vegetarian would like to, usually has it with this tandoori chicken. Have you tried tandoori chicken?
I make it at home.
Oh, you
I
have?
try.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. So
I
it's,
grew up with going for Indian food a couple
lovely.
of times a week.
Oh, lovely.
I'm a huge fan.
You are.
A
Brilliant.
huge fan.
Brilliant. So, will Jack Daniels go with tandoori chicken? $1 million question.
I think the whiskey is a very versatile whiskey. You just have to be careful about what other ingredients you use with it. So you're not going to use something that you wouldn't pair normally with. So yeah, there's definitely some spices that you could add to a cocktail. You could, how about, thinking off the top of my head, you did a Bloody Mary style drink with Jack Daniels in there. And the tomatoiness would go with the spicing and the chicken. That would work. You could do a tandoori Bloody Mary. How about that?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a thought.
If I get invited back to the country another day, I will perfect the recipe of a tandoori Jack Mary.
Look, you've confirmed that it goes with tandoori chicken, so you will definitely be welcome in this country. But before we leave, one last question. Tell us 3 of your favorite cocktails. You've already told us about the Tennessee Mule.
Yeah.
Is that one of your favorites?
It has to be, definitely, yeah.
And the number 2 would be the old-fashioned?
I would say for Gentleman Jack, try, as a best in show, if you want to go down the classic route, let's try a Gentleman Julep. So Gentleman Jack, a little bit of sugar, some mint leaves, a handful of mint leaves, and you stir that on crushed ice. That's a 100-year-old recipe. It's first developed in, let's say, the 1600s to have what the modern julep is today in and around America. It's a beautiful drink. That's one of my all-time favorites. For maybe the heavier whiskies, something like the single barrel, I would definitely go down the old-fashioned route. Actually, whilst I've been over here, I've been making old-fashions with a little bit of cinnamon whiskey, and just a little bit of bitters in there, 2 or 3 dashes of bitters, 10 ml of the cinnamon sugar, and a double measure of the whiskey. And let's say the Tennessee Mule, let's go for that with the old number 7. So the ginger beer, a little bit of Angostura bitters. Actually, ginger beer isn't so easy to get over here, so I've been making them with ginger ale, and it makes just a.
We don't get ginger beer very well. Yeah. So
I'll bring some with me on my next visit. I'll bring some with me on my next
Lovely. Brilliant. So here's the case. Now the deal is you can't have his job. I mean, you just can't. Most of you. I know maybe I can't. I don't think I can. So since you can't get his job, might as well indulge yourself in what he's indulging in. So we've been talking about Jack Daniels, a whiskey, an American Tennessee whiskey that's older than the country of Canada, and which has been around for a very long time, and which has different expressions. And in this country, one thing you need to know is that it goes with tandoori stuff. So that means you should just go out and try some. And thank you so much, Cam, for being with us today. We learned a fair bit about the whiskey. We'd love to taste some more, learn some more, and we look forward to your next visit then.
Thank you very much.
You have a good time.
The bar's over there. Let's go.
Let's go.